Okay, cabbies and cabettes, just a quick hit with this one because that's all the time it actually warrants. But taxis made the headlines again last week, courtesy of the Adam Smith Institute, who decided to revisit their call to overhaul taxi and private hire regulations. Nothing new there, I hear you add. But they inevitably made the media because of their stance, once again, to scrap the knowledge. Now, without going into too much detail about the report, because quite literally every point can be dissected, there are several self-explanatory reasons why the knowledge is still relevant, and here are just a couple. The first one is more of an aside, if nothing else, but passengers can quite often not be destination specific. It's not unusual for someone to get in the cab and ask to be taken, for example, to the Holiday Inn. We then have to engage in a kind of deductive process to identify and determine which Holiday Inn they want to go to. Now, I know some of our detractors might say, well, this isn't such a big deal, and as time goes by, passengers will learn to be more specific. But it does demonstrate the differential that exists between taxis and private hire, and the confidence passengers have in taxi drivers taking them to their desired destination, even if passengers themselves are not completely clear about where they need to go. And this also translates into why people choose a taxi instead of its private hire counterpart. And despite TfL's best efforts to homogenise the two services, most people still recognise the brand taxi and understand that the vehicle will be licensed to apply for hire, will be fitted with a taximeter for fair transparency, be 100% wheelchair accessible, and be driven by someone who has an in-depth working knowledge of this great city of ours. Our passengers don't want to take responsibility for the many variables and hazards a dense urban metropolis like London can throw up, such as police cordons or impromptu roadworks, and they rightly expect their taxi driver to have the versatility of mind to competently and effectively deal with those variables. And this brings me to the most arguable point, and that is the knowledge, if nothing else, is about safety. Statistics from TfL demonstrate that taxis are involved in the fewest collisions of any transport mode. And as far as causation goes, in London at least, taxis are on a par with cycling. Considering the amount of time taxi drivers spend on the road, that is quite a remarkable safety record. And that can only be attributed to the driver being fully conversant with the road layout, which means not having to be preoccupied with following routes on a GPS system. Now, that's not to say technology isn't useful. It is. Integrating it and applying it effectively has its benefits. And I'm not even saying taxi drivers don't use sat-navs either. But if I use one, I only need to reference it fleetingly. I don't need to be enslaved to its every instruction. And that is the point. The knowledge is about developing the skill to safely navigate a vast number of permeabilities that arise from committing to memory hundreds of routes that crisscross London. Following a sat-nav means the driver never has to commit anything to memory. They don't even have to know where they are going, and they would always have to acquiesce to the sat-nav. And this over-reliance is probably the reason why we see so many traffic accidents involving vehicles displaying private hire identifiers. Even the government recognises that the main prevention of accidents is road experience. And given the new laws around mobile phone use whilst driving, it is incomprehensible that the regulator would consider it a good thing, safety or otherwise, to flood the streets with tens of thousands of drivers who are duty-bound to phone gazing. On a final note, the London hackney carriage trade is one of the few manual skilled careers left that rewards endeavour over privilege. The knowledge test acted as a natural quantitative restriction barrier where take-up was based on a socio-economic criteria, such as the number of inhabitants and the number of tourists and business travellers. The taxi market was also geographically controlled since licences are only valid for the area of the issuing district, thus allowing supply to determine demand. Since the onset of rideshare, big business has done its damnedest to circumvent that system to benefit only themselves. Clogging up roads with mass oversupply of cars does nothing to help pollution, safety, or the expeditious flow of transport services. And let's face it, the last thing any of these big app companies want is more rules and regulations, and are doing all that they can to gain political support. But this report by the Adam Smith Institute is more about preventing a further decline in Uber's share value than it is about providing real benefits to Londoners and visitors to London. There are a staggering 100,000 minicab drivers registered in London. How many more does there have to be before ride-hailing apps such as Uber start to demonstrate efficiency savings themselves? And if TfL was serious about Vision Zero, they would look at more ways to support knowledge students becoming competent, safe taxi drivers who provide inclusive transport and actually know where they are going.